today's video, I went online and found some of the most commonly asked questions people are searching for about 3PLs. So we're going to walk through a couple, answer them, talk about them. So yeah, let's jump into it. First off, what is a 3PL? So what does 3PL mean? 3PL stands for third-party logistics. This can mean a lot of different things. In the world of e-commerce, this typically means like an e-commerce fulfillment center, but there are freight companies who are 3PL. Really, it's anyone who is handling logistics on behalf of another party. In most cases that we talk about, that is a brand, but their 3PL is definitely commonly used throughout the whole transportation industry. So just something to be aware of. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but that is what 3PL means. Next up, what are 3PL services? So like I mentioned, 3PL can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. In most cases, a 3PL, or I think an easier way to say it is e-commerce fulfillment center. That really is kind of more specific to what we're talking about. But typically, a 3PL you can send your products to, they will store them, they will package them, and they will ship them to the end user. They will also do things like returns and special projects that maybe you have to do, like kitting, or I know a lot of 3PLs will even do some like light manufacturing to help finish the product, right? You might get pieces from different vendors. The 3PL helps put it all together and put it into inventory. So 3PLs can do a lot of different things, but primarily they do warehousing, picking, and shipping is the way I like to think about it. What is a 3PL versus a 4PL? A 4PL was a relatively new model introduced in like the last 10 years, but the way I think about it is a 3PL, you're doing the shipping on behalf of someone else. You're the third party. A 4PL works with a bunch of third parties to do that same thing. So if I'm a brand and I want to go to a 4PL, they might be able to put me in 3 to 4 different 3PLs, but I'm only interfacing with that 4PL. So I might have a couple different 3PLs and warehouses actually shipping my goods. But to me, I'm only working with a single company and they are dealing with all of the stuff behind the scenes. So you're able to get a lot of efficiencies there, only having to deal with one company. So in theory, the model is great. There's been a lot of companies that have tried this. Some have done it successfully. There's also been others that have failed recently. It is a controversial topic, but that is what a 4PL is. Next up, we've got, when should you hire a 3PL for your e-commerce brand? There's no right or wrong answer here. Everyone's brand is different, but I typically like to tell people, if you're doing upwards of like 100 to 150 orders a month, you're probably a decent candidate for a 3PL that works with smaller clients. There are totally tiers to 3PLs, right? Some 3PLs will only work with you if you're doing 5,000 orders a month, but I have seen on the lower end, like usually 100 is about the minimum cutoff, I would say. Anything less than that, you have to imagine that's like 3 packages a day. You should probably just be shipping it. It's going to be cheaper for you, more efficient. That's a really broad statement to make, but typically that's like the low end. I think that most people should start working with a 3PL for a variety of reasons. Either they want out of the shipping process, which is totally valid. We ran our own brands and we just never got out of the shipping process. We just always kept it in-house and that's how it was. But some people can't do that, don't want to do that. So the other way I think about this is, what is your time worth compared to what you're spending shipping every day? And is the 3PL's fees going to be less than that? The answer is typically yes. From a purely a cost perspective, I see a lot of brands make the mistake of trying to compare 3PL costs to their own shipping costs and not calculating in the cost of their time or the warehouse they have to rent or all the kind of like other stuff that comes with it. It's not on paper and you might not be getting charged on your credit card for it, so it's hard to compare, but I think it's an important comparison to run because your time is worth a lot. The other thing I think about is there's other scenarios where you might have special shipping needs that you might not really have the ability to accommodate. There might be upfront costs. Those cases, it does make sense to work with a 3PL. I always think the exercise of brands shipping for themselves, though, is honestly really helpful because one day when they either grow their warehouse or go work with a 3PL, they'll have a much deeper understanding of how everything works and be a better partner in that sense. But I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. It depends what you want out of the brand and where you want it to go. But I typically tell people, like, if you're shipping more than an hour or two a day, it probably makes sense. Just for context, our lowest end kind of customers that we work with are typically shipping 100, 150, 200 orders a month, somewhere in that ballpark, all the way up to customers that are shipping 5, 10, 15, 20,000 orders a month. So it's all over the place. It just also depends. Does the 3PL have process in place to be able to work with someone who might be a smaller customer is another kind of consideration. All right, so next up we've got, how does 3PL e-commerce fulfillment work? So at a super high level, you as a brand are going to send inventory to their warehouse or warehouses, however they set you up, right? So they might have one location or multiple. You're going to send your inventory into their location. Their warehousing team is going to receive that product, note how many they got, put it into a bin location somewhere in the warehouse where they know where it is, and then they're going to connect to your Shopify, whatever it is. As orders come in, someone is going to get dispatched to go pick that order and then pack it according to whatever your specifications are. After that, typically it's going to get a label purchased for it from a postage provider, so think UPS, FedEx, USPS, DHL, whoever, and then it's going to go out. So at a really high level, that's the most simplified version. There are a million things that can happen in the middle, but typically inventory comes in, it sits in the warehouse somewhere, and then it goes back out whenever the order is placed. And that is what you're paying that 3PL to do. Can a 3PL handle international shipping? I would say in most cases, most 3PLs are going to have international shipping options. Always important to check with which ones, because there are so many these days. You have super fast services, you have super slow services, and then kind of a cost range within that. So just good to understand what your options are before working with a 3PL. But yeah, I would say most 3PLs are able to offer international shipping thanks to how easy carriers have made it these days. Some 3PLs, that might be their specialty. I have seen ones where like you have to work with certain 3PLs to be able to import certain things to certain countries, and there's definitely some value in that, right? For example, we had a customer of ours years ago that had asked us to start shipping cologne internationally. Tons of approval process and paperwork that has to be filed correctly, like really kind of a pain to figure out how to do. But once we figured that out, we actually had a bunch of other people that came along and were like, I'm trying to ship cologne internationally as well, can you help? It was much easier for us to like help someone like that where we already had existing process in place. How fast can a 3PL ship orders? Well, this totally just depends on your 3PL's process and your agreements and everything. For some context, Monday mornings are usually crazy for 3PLs because if they aren't shipping over the weekend, or even if they are, usually it's lighter crews. So Monday morning is usually clogged up, and hopefully by the end of Monday, all the orders are out and they're caught up again. So I've seen like the rest of the week, you see orders that if there's no holds or gestation periods, they can go out as quick as like 20 minutes after the order is placed, assuming you have inventory and all of that. It really just depends on what the load at that given warehouse on that day is, because you might have a bunch of people that are sitting around kind of waiting for more orders to come in. If they're all caught up, they might be doing other tasks, but it just depends on what the capacity is at that warehouse and what kind of volume the other clients that are there are also bringing. But it can be as fast as you want it to be. I've totally seen orders that have gone out 5, 10, 15 minutes after the order's placed, to the point where you get an email from the customer being like, hey, I think something's wrong. I just got a tracking number. And it's like, no, like it actually went out that fast. How do 3PLs manage your inventory? Great question. Most 3PLs these days are using some sort of warehouse management system or inventory management system. Usually you as a customer are going to get a portal with access to view your inventory and all of that. And honestly, most of them these days are like real time, which is pretty cool. But typically it's going to be some sort of software that your 3PL is using. You get access to it, and they manage all their inventory through there for you, and you're able to go in and see exactly what is where and how much of it and what's been deducted and shipped and all of that. And so it's really handy, especially when it gets into like kind of the more complex inventory stuff around demand forecasting and all of that. These tools can like be super helpful. What are the most common mistakes that brands make when choosing a 3PL? I think one of the main kind of pitfalls that I see brands make far too often is comparing solely on cost. The reality is all 3PLs charge probably somewhat of a similar amount, and it comes down to what does your relationship with that 3PL look like, and is this someone that you're going to want to work with long term? I've seen brands that have picked solely off of cost, and almost every time they end up moving 3PLs, which is a whole kind of expensive process to do, if you will, because they went cheap the first time. And usually you kind of pay for what you get for. Like I said, most 3PLs that provide decent service are all relatively within the same price range. At that point, you're kind of choosing who you want to work with and maybe certain locations or services they offer. But most 3PLs are pretty competitive on price. Like you don't have ones that are super, super cheap and some that are super, super expensive. Usually everyone's kind of somewhat similar. The difficult part is all the 3PLs have different billing models, and so you have to understand how they're billing you for what. The thing I always tell brands to look at is what does your all-in cost on an order look like? So figure out how many average picks you have per order, apply it to the pricing model that the 3PL gives you, and just try to get close on what is your average cost per order. And if that is all within kind of the same range, then it's kind of up to you, like who do you want to work with. But I think that is probably the most important thing. It's so easy for certain pricing models to look cheaper than others, and it's just important to run actual like test data through there to see what that would look like. And honestly, recently I've seen a bunch of 3PLs that will actually, like, if you give them a data sheet, they will model out what their costs look like, which I think is super beneficial for the brand, and you should always take them up on that. because it's going to very clearly outline and show you like, okay, here's what your actual average costs look like. I also think that asking the 3PL for maybe a reference or someone to talk to that works with them currently is always helpful. And that conversation is usually helpful. It's like, okay, here's what the 3PL is really good at. Here's where I haven't been totally thrilled. Here's where they've been improving. But just getting an understanding of like what it's like to actually work with them before diving all in, I think is super helpful too. Do 3PLs handle returns? Yes, 3PLs do handle returns. Not all, but a lot of them. For us as a e-commerce fulfillment center, we do the outbound, but we also do returns processing. So for like apparel, we might repackage it or steam it or clean it or whatever. Everyone's SOPs around returns processing is different, but generally speaking, I would say yes, 3PLs do handle returns and they do a pretty good job at it for the most part. I've also seen 3PLs that are return only 3PLs, which I think are super cool. Basically, they only deal with returns and all of the like, there's like a super deep rabbit hole you could go into when it comes to returns, but they deal with kind of anything under the sun when it comes to returns. They will handle it. And I've seen some super cool scenarios that those types of 3PLs have been able to solve problems that like traditional ones may not have been able to. So yeah, those were some of the internet's most commonly asked questions about 3PLs. Hopefully you took something from that. Maybe you got a question answered. If you have other questions, please leave us a comment. I will check them out and hopefully answer it in a future video. But until then, happy shipping.